Okay, so on to the main event for today. The title I've got for today's presentation is On the Ground with Shelterbox During Disasters, to be given by our guest for the day, our only guest, Dave Hallett. And with that, Marilyn, would you care to do the introductions, please?
I know from everybody saying hello to Dave that a lot of you already know him, but I met him when he made the presentation at the district meeting in the fall in Kingston. So professionally, Dave is a solution architect who works in the cloud, lives by the lake, and serves around the world. And as a Shelterbox response team member, he's deployed to natural disasters and conflict areas around the world. Nepal, Philippines, Ethiopia, Somalia, Malawi, China, Somaliland. But he'll tell us, I think, mostly about the most recent time when he was in Nepal, Indonesia. Okay. Okay, please welcome Dave.
Hi, everybody. Let's make sure that I'm talking at the right volume here and not blowing anybody out. It looks like it's pretty... So, yes, my name's Dave Hallett. I'm a member of the Kingston Waterfront Rotary Club. We're a Rotary Club that started out of a satellite Rotary Club, and we're about 21 members. We meet on Monday evenings at 5:30 if you find yourself in Kingston and you want to come out. We meet at the RCWO Club for a drink. We don't have a meal. So, anyway, I've been with Shelterbox now since 2007. I guess it originally started a little earlier than that. Anybody who's been around Rotary for any length of time knows Bill Gray. And Bill Gray originally went over to the Copenhagen International Conference, came back with a demo Shelterbox back in 2005, and came to the Rotary Club that we both belong to, and said, I needed volunteers to help me set this thing up. So for a couple of years, I worked with Bill, toting this big green box around to car shows, craft shows, golf tournaments, anywhere that somebody would let us set it up, and try to let people know what Shelterbox is. And then this email came out and said, we're looking for Shelterbox response team members. And so I replied to the email, and the rest is sort of history. So I'm not sure, I recognize an awful lot of faces here, so I'm not sure how much background I have to give to Shelterbox, but there might be some new members, so we'll do it pretty quickly. Fair enough? Why we exist. When Shelterbox was founded by a gentleman, Rotarian by the name of Tom Henderson, he recognized that in the area of disasters, there was lots of people out there, Médecins Sans Frontières, UNICEF, Red Cross, they all had their mission, but none of them had a mission of shelter. And so he recognized this gap in the humanitarian assistance, and he motivated a bunch of Rotarians in the southwest of England to start this thing called Shelterbox. And so that's how it all got started back in 2000. But now, essentially, our mission is to make sure that after natural disasters, some man-made disasters, as in conflict areas and things like that, that we try to make sure that the most vulnerable people do not go without shelter. It's a fairly simple message. And I think I stole some of this. Why shelter? So why shelter is because nobody else is doing it, is the basic answer. There's a few other people now doing it. We've got a few people that sort of understood what we're doing, and quite frankly, Shelterbox cannot supply all the shelter that's needed around the world. We're not that big. So that's why we target the most vulnerable people. In the time span since about 2000, when this started, we've responded to over 300 disasters, over 100 countries. Some of them we've been back to many, many times. We've helped over 1 million people with housing or some type of shelter. And we are now actually looked on as a leader in the humanitarian sector. So when natural disasters happen, we get reached out to say, how can you help, or can you come and do this thing for us? Way back in the beginning, when we first started doing this, back 2004, 5, 6, we had to phone people up and say, can we come? Because nobody knew who we were, nobody knew what we had, and so we had to do a lot of work. And I'm going to get to it a little bit later, but a lot of that came about through our working with Rotary. We have worked with Rotarians around the world, and we've been doing it since 2000 when it started as a Rotary Club project in Helston Lizard, and now we work with Rotarians around the world continually. We talk about going the extra mile. One of the things about making your mission being the most vulnerable people, very, very often the most vulnerable people are not the easiest people to find. They're hidden for a number of reasons. They might be hidden because their disability is shunned wherever they live. They might be hidden because they're in a remote community and nobody's been out to see them, so the big trucks can't get there or whatever it happens to be. So for many, many reasons, the most vulnerable people are often very hidden. And so a shelter box, you know, you see these two guys, that's Dave and Chris, and they're hauling them off the tarmac. They weigh about 55 kilos, so they're pretty heavy. And they come with I think I have this slide. Oh, no, that's, they come with a tent and some other stuff in it. I've got a slide that shows what's in them. But the nice part about them is we can take these things and we can put them in almost anything. So we can put them on the back of a donkey. We can put them into a small truck, like they have in many of these third world countries. We can put them on the back of big trucks. Because they're fairly mobile, we can go anywhere we need to go. So that helps us get to those most vulnerable people. So some of the things that I've done, I think Marilyn made a mention of it. I started, my very first deployment was into Somaliland, which is the northwest tip, what used to be Somalia, anyway, if anybody needs a map. I visited China in 2008 after their big earthquake. I was on the Ethiopia-Somali border during the East African famine in 2011. And then the Malawi earthquake that happened just before Christmas in 2009. So I have a lot of people ask me if I went to support the Haiti work that we did, because it was our biggest deployment ever. We were actually there for about 6 months. And I didn't, because I was Boxing Day 2009, I was on a plane to Malawi for that earthquake. I got back on January 11th, and January 12th was the earthquake in Haiti, and my boss said, no, you can't go again. So anyway, so I've been to Malawi, and then the Philippines typhoon in 2013. That was a huge area. It was called the Super Typhoon Haiyan that went through there in 2013, and it took out this huge swath of area. 2015 Nepal earthquake, you may have heard about that. That's when they actually shut down the trails to get up to Everest and stuff. That happened that spring. And we helped some people there. 2017, I was in Colombia after the landslides. A little bit of a note there. We finished up a little bit early in 2017 when doing the work that we were doing. So we spent the last couple of days working with the National Disaster Agency in Colombia, because at that time they were preparing for the Venezuelan humanitarian disaster that's coming. And so we were talking with them at that time about, well, what happens if we get an influx of Venezuelan people into Colombia and those sorts of things. So it's kind of interesting how you're there on the ground doing these things. And then last summer I was in Indonesia after the earthquake that hit Lombok Island in Indonesia, and I'll talk a little bit more about that deployment to give you an idea of what we actually do when we're on the ground with that. Our whole mission really is to support communities. The goal here is I guess I didn't really understand how this works until I was on the ground in China in 2008. And it was a big earthquake that happened in the Sichuan province in China in 2008. About 30,000 people died. And we went to some remote areas. We flew into a place called Chengdu, which is a big city. It's, I don't know, 5 million people or something like that. But very quickly, we were asked to leave and go over the mountains to some communities on the other side, which is actually very close to the Tibetan Plateau. We went there, and this was sort of my first experience doing this, because the first time I was out with 2007 was more of a refugee relief type thing. But this one was a disaster, so people's homes were gone and that sort of stuff. And the first time we set up just a small, I think it was 12 tents for this community to sort of get back together again. They were a small fishing community on the edge of a river, and or they made most of their living off the fish on the river. And when we put these 12 tents up, and then we came back about a day later, and you can see how like a community had built up around just 12 tents. It was quite remarkable to see. There was kids playing, and there was mums in the tent, you know, some of them breastfeeding and stuff. And so it was remarkable to me at that very first time of actually delivering tents and putting them up for people, to see how they come together and how they start to bring a sense of normalcy anyway. So it's really important there. For those of you who have never seen a shelter box before, it's a big green box. I have no idea how these ladies carry them on their heads. I've seen ladies do it, men do it. It's 55 kilos. It's got a big tent in it, big family-sized tent. It's got tools and pots and pans, mosquito nets, water purification kit. It's jam-packed right to the rafters with blankets and ground sheets and other things. It's essentially intended to give a family who's lost their home a place to stay and some basic livelihood in terms of cooking utensils and being able to get some fresh water and that sort of stuff. We don't bring any food with us. We don't even pack water purification tablets anymore. We used to pack water purification tablets in them until we actually responded to Katrina in the U.S., and the U.S. Customs Agency declared that a food product, and we couldn't bring them in. So we had to open hundreds and hundreds of boxes and take the tablets out and reclose the boxes up again to get them in. But we have lots of little stories like that that go along. The newest addition to our kit is what we call the shelter kit. So it used to be, for many, many years, all we had was a tent. We had a big green box, big tent in it, some stuff, and that's what we delivered. And one of the hardest things to do is when you go on the ground and you visit some communities or something, and somebody says, can we give this lady, this man, this family a kit? And you're kind of going, they're not really in bad enough shape to give them one of these things, when there's some people over here who are in much more dire need. And what the shelter kit's been able to do for us is it's been able to give us more of a repair kit. Now this is a different one. This is a picture from the big hurricane that went through the Dominica 2 years ago, I guess it was now. And they're actually building a full house and lining it with these big tarps that come in the shelter kit. But most of the people that use the shelter kit use it to repair their home. Because if their home was not fully damaged, we might not have given them a shelter box with a full tent and everything. We didn't have anything else to give them. Now we have these shelter kits that go out, and they have these tarps for repairing, and they've got ropes and nails and all that sort of stuff, so they can use it to repair their homes. And these are a lot cheaper too. So we can actually deploy more of these. When I was in Nepal, we deployed, I don't know, maybe something like 10,000 shelter kits over the span of a few weeks, whereas we never get, well, I think Haiti we got that high with the amount of shelter boxes, but rarely would we ever get that high with full shelter boxes. So just to talk about my latest deployment, in last summer, 2018, for those of you who know where Indonesia is, so you can see just above Australia, and the island that was affected was called Lombok Island. So Indonesia is about, I don't know, depending on what you read, it's about 12,000 islands. And the thing I didn't realize, it's the 4th most populous country in the world. And so there's a lot of people there. And Lombok Island is right beside Bali. Most of us have heard of Bali, just maybe never been there, but it's a big vacation spot. If you're an Australian, you might go there the same way we go to Florida. But right beside it is Lombok Island, also a tourist area, but not quite as developed as Bali. And on the at the end of July, I think it was the 28th or something like that of July, there was an earthquake up in the top north there of Lombok Island. And then it happened again, and it happened again, and it happened again, and it happened again. So those big 4 red dots are July 28th, I think it is, August 5th, and then August 19th are the 2 red dots on the sort of the top right-hand side of that thing. And I arrived in Indonesia on the 23rd, I think it was, of August, just after all these earthquakes had come through. We'd had 2 people in country about a week before, so they went through those last 2 earthquakes. But we were essentially bringing aid. I haven't got it marked on this map, but almost down at the bottom where the little inlet of water shows, that's where their airport is. And so we were, and their water port. So we were bringing kit up to the north of Lombok Island to deliver into these communities that were pretty devastated. And what you see when you drive by in the cars is this is what 75% home destruction looks like when you're driving by. And we'll just do it one more time. We drove by a lot of these communities, and they were just gone. And what happens when those communities go like that is the emergency services put up these big sort of communal living spaces to try to bring people together, because it's quite an effort to bring that many people together and get them some wash, for hygiene, and where do they get water from, where do they go to the bathroom, all those sorts of things. And so these are the areas where people were moved from when they moved from from those villages that were brought down, and are now living maybe in the big orange tent that's put up by the emergency services, or maybe in these sort of makeshift tents made out of tarps or stuff, or wherever they might have got them from. And so when we arrive, one of the things that a lot of these families have to do is they have to clear their land, because the government is going to come by and give them some supplies and give them some support, but they have to basically clear their house. This was a full house, just like you can see the timber there that we might have used for putting up our walls. They use a lot more concrete than we use, but that's just the way they build. And this gentleman was actually breaking down his house by hand so that he could clear it and start rebuilding. So that's when we arrive, this is what we're arriving to, right? We're arriving to 75% home destruction. Everybody's been moved into these communal camps. People are trying to clear their land so they can start to rebuild and those sorts of things. And then we arrive, and who do you help, right? Who do you help? And that's probably the hardest thing we do. So the gentleman with his back to us in the black shirt, his name is Herman, we might say. And he was our translator. Awesome gentleman. And just right beside him to the right with a baseball cap on is Dave Ray. So Dave Ray and I were the team from Shelterbox in. And so what Dave is doing right now is he has gathered we would call them the mayor. They call them the Dason, and I forget what the other name is. But essentially the mayor or the reeve type person for this village area. And he's explaining to them that we have these shelter boxes, and what we're looking for is we're looking for the most vulnerable people in your community. We're looking for the people who may have young ones at home under 6 months of age. Maybe you have women who are pregnant and are going to be having a baby in the next little while. Maybe some people who are severely damaged, injured in the earthquake. And we're trying to get these 2 gentlemen to tell us who to give help to. Because if we just go around and we just sort of drop it off at various spots, then the risk we run is creating this risk of inequality and jealousy amongst the people, right? So we talk to the Dason leaders and we say, these are the kinds of people that we're looking to help, We'd prefer it if they were in one of these camps and we could bring them out, because it's no fun being in one of those big camps and having to breastfeed, or it's no fun having to get your dressings changed if you're injured, or any of these sorts of things, right? So if we can bring those people out of those camps, that'll make it more comfortable for the families left behind, but it'll also give these people some privacy and some tools and stuff that they can use to recover in. So that's the idea. So we're chatting with the, oh, I didn't realize this was a video too. We're chatting with the two Dason leaders and explaining to them what it is we're trying to do. And so typically we would come back about 2 days later after we've explained what to do, and they would have then a list. And so they would say, this is, you know, this lady, this lady, this lady, this gentleman, this gentleman, this gentleman are all eligible for, or we think that they should get shelter boxes in our community. And so then what we would do is we would gather all these people together and we'd give them a little demo on how to put up a tent. Because if anybody's volunteered with Bruce or anybody else to set up the tent, it's kind of a big deal. It's kind of and they're awkward, and we don't want them damaged as they're trying to put them up. So the way we split things up between Dave and I, my job was to give this mass training, and I do not speak Indonesian. So the idea that we generally run is that I have the translator. Arman's there. You probably can't see him, but Arman's there, and I'm trying to give Arman instructions. Say, so Arman, tell them all to push the poles through. Don't pull the poles. Only push the poles. These kinds of instructions. And the general gist is you never touch the tent. I never touch the tent, right? Because it's too easy to just go and let me do it for you, right? Because they've got to go, and they may have to set up another 20 now on their own, because we're going to leave them behind, or whoever the community decided was going to get a tent. So we're trying to get this, and it's quite comical, actually, because, you know, there's 20, 30 guys hanging around. There's women too, but they're sort of a step back. Smart ladies. And so when it comes time to lift those poles, there's probably, like, you know, 5 people on each end of each pole lifted this thing up, and then we're trying to you know, do the insides and all that sort of stuff. So it's kind of a fun time, but it's very hot. It's probably getting close to 30 degrees when we're doing this, and so it's a very it's a very dirty job. It's the easiest way to do it. But then once we've done that, so we've shown them how to set up one, and now we want to give them their tent, give them their shelter box. And so this is Dave sort of setting up a makeshift desk on top of a shelter box, and he's actually interviewing this young man here, because we said we wanted, you know, people who had you know, young babies at home, or young women who are about to have a baby, whatever other criteria we had. And so when this gentleman is presented to us, Dave is actually interviewing and saying, so how many people in your household, how many under the age of 6, how many are pregnant, and he's got this long list to fill out. And part of the reason that we're doing that is to validate that we're giving to somebody who actually deserves it, but also because we supply these numbers back to the humanitarian agencies like at the UN and some of these other agencies. And so that's part of how we've justified our existence as a humanitarian assistance organization and been respected around the world, because we're collecting these kinds of beneficiary data. That gentleman with the silver hair facing Dave is actually past Desert Governor Al. I can't remember his last name, but and he hung out with us for a few days. He was an interesting guy. And we actually had a lot of help from Rotarians in Indonesia. So once Dave's done his job, this is Dave doing his job again down there on just writing things out. We're handing out shelter boxes, and typically my side of this deal is I'm looking after the back of the truck so they don't disappear. And so once Dave says, okay, this gentleman can have a shelter box, he sends them over to me, and I sell. And this is kind of funny, because you can see the guy loading the shelter boxes up into his van there on the left-hand side, and he puts 2 up top there. And everybody was scurrying around looking for some rope to tie these things down, and they never found any. So this poor gentleman got the job of just sitting on top of the boxes as this van drove away. And they're very ingenious, you know? They want to get where they're going. I have a few shots like that. But this one is kind of good as well. Somebody's got a 55-kilo shelter box on the back of a motorcycle. And he's got a cigarette in his hand. And the other guy's just going, yeah, I think it's balanced. Go for it. There's no rope on that. And I don't know how far he had to go, but I just wish him well. So you see a lot of those kinds of things as well. There you actually see, this is in Indonesia. Again, we did a lot of these kinds of setups where you would actually help somebody where they would clear their home site so that we could set up a box. And this happens a lot in a lot of third world countries because the notion of land title and deeds and stuff are all a little nebulous in some of these countries. And so a lot of people will say, yes, I really want one of these and I want it where my house was. So that I still can put this claim to my land or whatever it happens to be. And so that's why you see a lot of things set up like that. And there's our Rotary friends from Indonesia. They were collecting on their own a lot of these foodstuffs and other supplies and those sorts of things from all over Indonesia, and they were bringing them in. And this is sort of our central depot. This is where we stored our shelter boxes, and they brought these things in. And so quite often we were going out in a truck with some shelter boxes in the back of the truck, and then our Rotarian friends would be following us with whatever they got to deliver as well. So it was good. And this was one of these interesting times where Rotary actually facilitated getting Shelterbox into the country, because Indonesia did not ask for international assistance after the earthquake. They said, no, we got this. We just kind of went, okay. Then they put up those big orange tents. That's BNPB. I can't remember what it stands for, but it's the equivalent of FEMA in Indonesian. And they put up these big orange tents and stuff. But like you said, it's not a great place to be when you've got small families or when you're recovering from injuries or those sorts of things. And the reason that we were able to get in there was because this was actually proposed to the government as a Rotarian assistance program. And so, I don't know, I think that was the only day I actually had a Shelterbox shirt on. Every other day I had a Rotary shirt on, or one of those Rotary bibs that we were wearing. And that was how we got just disaster aid into the country, because we essentially gave it to Rotary and then helped them distribute it. So interesting times. So how can you help? You can help by donating to Shelterbox. We have what we call a hero program. There's $12,000 for an individual or a club who gives is a bronze level, $3,600 silver, and gold is $6,000. I think your club is already at the silver level for 2019. If you want to hit the gold, there's still some time left before the end of the year. There's all kinds of different things you can do. One of the most important things, I believe, I kind of divert from my script here. One of the most important things I believe that Rotarians can help us do is just keep raising awareness, because the number of people I run into just having coffee and business wherever, and I mention Shelterbox and they go, what? What's Shelterbox? Never heard of Shelterbox. I was in the UK 2 weeks ago on business, and I was talking to a guy and I mentioned Shelterbox. Oh yeah, they're based out of the UK. And they went, who? So the most important thing we can do is raise the awareness of Shelterbox. And so if you've got golf tournaments, craft shows, car shows, trade shows, I don't care what it is, if you're willing to set up a tent, we'll get you a tent. I think Bruce Harrison has one, maybe some other people have one, because we want you to spread the word, because when a disaster strikes, so there's two things here. We like talking to Rotary clubs about doing this, and you folks have already given some money in 2019, and that's great. And what that has done is that has bought us some inventory. So that inventory is somewhere, I don't know where. Could be in the UK, could be in one of our 10 or 12 depots that we've got around the world. And if a disaster strikes tomorrow, that might be your boxes that go tomorrow, because we've already bought them, right? So we can talk to Rotary clubs about being proactive that way, and if you'll keep it in your international budget or however you decide to do it, that's wonderful. The general public doesn't usually think like that, though. The general public usually sees something on TV, something bad happened, and they want to write a check. We want them to know about us, because because if they don't know about us, they will write a check to somebody else. And that'll go somewhere well. That'll be good as well. However, we're looking to have the awareness raised as much as possible. So if any time you get a chance to stick the tent up, you don't necessarily have to raise any money. Lots of people just stick a jar in front to collect some loonies and toonies or something. You may send in $100 or something like that. But if you can raise the awareness and let people know what Shelterbox is all about, that helps us over the long term. You can always go to shelterboxcanada.org, sign up for the newsletter, and you'll find out, I guess you get an email about once a month maybe, talking about where we are. We have teams on the ground all the time now. It used to be that we would go out and we'd come back and we'd have a break, but we now have teams on the ground 365 days a year doing something. So you can volunteer with us. We have a whole bunch of different roles if you want to talk about it. If somebody wants to do what I do and go out and talk about Shelterbox, we have these presentations and stuff. You can keep telling your Interact clubs about it and those sorts of things. But the most important thing for us is raising the awareness about the job that Shelterbox is doing. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
We're trying to get people to donate personally, that if they donate the value of the Shelterbox, are they given a number of that box and they can track where that box ended up?
Yeah, we still do that with individuals because it's a good donation getting thing. We don't do it as much with general donations like from Rotary clubs and stuff anymore. It's a lot of work to track boxes. When we were only distributing about 1,000 boxes a year, it wasn't too hard to keep track of them. But when you're distributing 10,000 boxes a year and you got people on the ground all the time and you got some of them pre-positioned and some of them being packaged up as needed and stuff, it becomes very hard. So we do it with individual donors, but we tend to try to keep what we call general revenues, not box specific. Yeah. Ooh. Sure.
What happens to the shelter boxes after people don't need them anymore? If you go back into their home, at least presumably they could still be operational, right?
They are.
Use again, or
Well,
locations,
so the shelter box is a gift to the family. So the family gets to keep it, and it's now theirs. They own it. And they can then do whatever they want. And we've seen a few different things. We've actually seen them show up in the marketplaces sometimes. So somebody's lived in their shelter box for a couple of months or whatever, and then they've packaged it back up and they took it to the marketplace. People go, oh, that's so bad. And it's like, well, no, think about it for a minute here. Because somebody got to sleep undercover for 2 months or whatever time frame it was, and then they were able to turn it around and sell it for whatever they could sell it for, and they probably bought some farming utensils with it, or they bought some building material with it, or something along those lines. And so that means somebody else thought the shelter box was valuable and bought it, and so whoever we gave it to originally got the $100 or $200 or whatever it was they got for the shelter box when it was used to continue to rebuild their home and rebuild their lives. So I don't have a problem with that kind of stuff. It's a little more shaky when you give it to somebody and you know they've never lived in it, and it's like, we don't like that. So we do have what we call post-deployment monitoring, where we go back and find out, did they all get used, and if they didn't get used, how come they got diverted, or whatever it happens to be, because we try to, when you're doing things as fast as you can, sometimes mistakes happen, and I experienced that when I was in Nepal. We found this family and we set this tent up for this family. We returned 2 or 3 days later. The place was vacant. They weren't living there. They weren't living in the tent. They weren't living in their house. It was empty. We felt like taking the tent down and taking it with us, but that was, we didn't do that. Doug?
Splendid presentation, Dave. Very thorough. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
This business of being recognized, outside of Rotary. When in the TV news, the CBC, there's a disaster area, we get a picture of the shelters that have been provided, but you never run on the shelter box. How do you persuade, or can you persuade some publicity of that nature?
We try. One of the challenges is there's very, very, very rarely a Canadian news reporter on the ground. Very rarely. I've given BBC interviews when I've been away, and I haven't given, but my teammates have given to US, CNN was on one that we were on, but there's very rarely a Canadian one. You will see more often than not on CBC particularly, they seem to be good to us, is that when a disaster happens, one of the young ladies from headquarters will go down to the CBC studios, and they'll do something right in the studio saying, we're sending out a team and and this is what we're sending. But it's local, it's Canadian, right? It's down in the King Street CBC offices. So we try as hard as we can to get in front of as many news people as we can, but we're kind of limited to whoever shows up. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you cut through the red tape so quickly to get on the ground right at the time?
Well, sometimes we don't. So, as an example, that 2007 Somalia effort that I was on, I spent 2 weeks going through all the paperwork and everything, trying to get the boxes in, and I never got them in. They arrived about 4 or 5 days after I left, and we had to leave them in the capable hands of a Rotarian. But our team had to leave, so I mean that's the worst case scenario. But for the most part, it's kind of interesting. We don't send boxes out of the UK or out of one of our pre-positioned areas until we have a consignee in country who's eligible to bring things in tax-free. So a lot of times, if you're the first person on the ground, you're running around, whatever the head office is or whatever, looking for a consignee. Is it going to be the UN? Will the Red Cross do it? Will Rotary do it? Who will sign for these boxes so that we can get them in tax-free? And so that's usually what we're trying to do. And in the case of Indonesia, it was Rotarians, because it was a Rotarian who owned a warehouse in Jakarta, and was able. So there was actually some pre-positioned stock in Jakarta, but she was also able to bring in other stuff, and then they were able to ship it down to us. So that's the biggest job, is getting, because if we don't have the consignee, we can't even put it on the plane. So I'm
Can
done.
we just have time for one more question, please?
one more.
Just one more.
Linda.
Great presentation, Dave, as always. Typically, as a club, we budget $1,200 allotments for a shelter box. With the shelter kits,
Yep.
can we identify what the cost is, A, and can we actually tell you we would like X number of shelter kits as opposed to the shelter box?
You could. I'd ask you not to. And the reason for that is because your $1,200, or it's actually, some of you may have done some personal donations. I think that might be why it's at $4,000 so far this year. Because you understand how we work and stuff, what we hope is that you'll give us the $4,000 and hope that we'll use it the best way possible. We might need a couple of shelter boxes out of that, and so that's $2,400 out of that. And then the next time we go somewhere, we might bring 300 shelter kits with us. And what we're looking for out of our most favored donors is the flexibility to buy what's needed with the money that you give us. Fair enough? All right.
To start with, I'd like to thank Brett and Dave, as this presentation has been recorded and will be available online. It's worth noting that Dave is one of 12 response people in Canada for the Shelterbox. Thank you for your presentation, Dave, and the history of the Shelterbox. There's a note here I found on Google. It was from Chief Sonyaka from Malani in Malawi. When I received a shelter kit, it gave me the courage to start rebuilding my house because I knew that I had the materials I needed for a roof. Therefore, he had somewhere to call home. On behalf of the West Ottawa Rotary Club, I'd like you to accept a donation on behalf of the Rotary International for preventing polio.
Thank you.
Is this?
That's it.
Okay. Sorry, I think this is something else. Is that it?
Mary back there?
Okay, there it is. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave, for that really a very informative presentation. It's always good to hear about the substantive work that ends up getting done from the fundraising that we do and the funds that we pass on. So thank you for having come and done this for us.